This Fed Gov Today program is sponsored by ServiceNow. On this edition of Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose, the clock is ticking on a $100 billion IT problem, defining the guardrails as AI proliferates across government, and the fraud detection dilemma that's eating agency budgets. Welcome to Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose. A roadmap is missing for 8 of the biggest legacy information technology systems in government. The Government Accountability Office finds only about a quarter of the systems that need modernization most have a plan in place. Kevin Walsh is Director of Information Technology and Cybersecurity at GAO. Kevin, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. This work is a follow-on to work that you did 5 or 6 years ago. What's the trend line look like in your view from where agencies were modernizing legacy systems in 2019 versus today?
Sure. So in 2019, we flagged the 10 most critical legacy systems in need of modernization. And of that 10, 3 of them have successfully modernized. The remaining 7 have not, which gives you kind of some perspectives into how long a time frame we're talking about to get some of these modernizations done. But in this most recent work, what we did is we basically did the same methodology over again. We talked to agencies, hey, what are your most important legacy systems? We collected a whole bunch of data on it, and then we did the same exercise again with a little bit more of a cybersecurity flair. You know, our methodology has evolved over time, and so this time we're at 11 systems. 2 of the systems are holdovers from the old list and now on the new list. And so of those 11, there are, as you mentioned, 8 that need a modernization plan. So kudos to the 3 that had a modernization plan. Excellent. So we made recommendations to the 8 agencies that didn't have a modernization plan or had incomplete plans. And we also have a matter for congressional consideration here. Basically, we flagged for Congress that if a system is one of the agencies most in need of modernization, they should really have a modernization plan to go along with that.
What's your view of what a good modernization, complete modernization plan looks like? You alluded to a couple that weren't complete.
So this is a very low bar that we're setting here in this report. We're not looking at the quality of these modernization plans. We're just looking for some basic things. 1, do you have a plan? 2, do you have an idea, a description of the work that needs to be done? 3, do you have some milestones along the way? And 4, and perhaps most critically, do you have a plan to shut off the old system? The last thing we want is you build a new system and it does 90% of what the old system does, but the old system still is doing that critical 10%. So now rather than getting rid of the legacy system, you've got a really old legacy system that you still need to keep around.
You mentioned that there are 3 systems that have completed this process since the last time you looked. Tell me about those 3 and what they did to get over the bar to be successful.
So we didn't get into that too much in this particular report. One of the problems that we see kind of as an issue in the current set of systems that don't have those modernization plans is funding, and there's also some uncertainty in the government right now. Plans are changing, things are evolving. One of the bigger issues that we flag early on in the report is how pervasive and long-lasting this issue has been. We point out that this is VA's 4th attempt over the past decades at modernizing their EHR system. We also note that the air traffic control systems at FAA, there's 138 of them, 105 of them are unsustainable, which, you know, we've seen air traffic control systems sadly in the news a lot recently. Education also has issues with cost and schedule. IRS has several hundred systems that are legacy that they don't have plans to modernize. So this is not a one-off fix. Legacy systems in the government, contrary to what people may be thinking, legacy systems are never a problem that you can fully address. You're always going to have systems that stop meeting mission needs. You're going to have newer technology, and these systems are just going to keep getting older. And parts wear out, hardware and software. Eventually vendors stop supporting it. By the way, in our top 11 list, there are a handful that don't have supported hardware or software that we flag as particularly concerning. That means it's so old that maybe now the vendor has gone out of business. We see that at the FAA, where the company that was manufacturing parts, not in business anymore. Hard to get spare parts if they're not even being made. So this is an issue that the government and private industry have to deal with all the time. And part of me, is okay with that. The government shouldn't have the newest and flashiest technology. I don't want the government to have, spend all that money to try and get the newest and brightest and stuff, because the government has to be looking in the long term. We want to make sure that we have these systems in place that are going to last another 40, 50, even 60 years, like some of these. But as part of that, we need to make sure we get off on the right foot. We need to make sure that we have that basic idea, what are we going to be doing? What are some time frames along the way? And get ready to shut off that old one.
Why is one of the recommendations for Congress to require agencies to do this? So
we originally, in 2012, 2013, made a recommendation to OMB to have guidance related to legacy systems. That was, I believe, a 2012 report, so it's been 13 years and OMB has not acted on it. So we think this is a critical issue. We want to drive more action and more effort, so we're going to the bosses.
And you also write, GAO is making a total of 8 recommendations, 7 agencies, about documentation of these plans. What's the documentation that you think would be satisfactory? You mentioned earlier it's kind of a low bar.
That's exactly right, Francis. This is that low bar. Have a plan with some description of the work needed to be done, some milestones, and a plan to shut off the old system.
And I think to that point, the passage in your report that I thought maybe was the most troubling, the incomplete modernization plans are especially concerning for 7 of the systems because they reportedly have modernizations already underway. Is there any documentation among those 7 plans, or are they just kind of moving forward without?
So a lot of this was partials. There were 2 that didn't have any plan. So that's particularly worrisome. But most of these, they had some of these critical things that we want to see. In the vein of the top 11, we also had 8 that used legacy programming languages, such as COBOL, several that were operating with known security vulnerabilities. I believe there were 7 of those. And this is what happens as these systems get older. You get more cyber vulnerabilities, increased costs. A lot of times the people who know how to work the systems are retired or dead. And so this is not something that we're going to see go away again. This is just something that we need to be mindful of with these systems as they are aging and as all our new systems are aging.
Kevin, it's great to have you on the program again. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for the invite.
You can read more about the modernization plans and find a link to the work that Kevin's team did on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, defining the guardrails as AI proliferates across government. Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose. We'll be right back.
They're building little practice groups where they're really finding, hey, this works really well for my workflow. And that's what I mean by empowering the frontline employees, because we're not going to be the ones to decide, or I think it would be a mistake for us to think here in DC that we can decide how this should be used. The people on the front lines know what their problems are. We need to give them the tools, and they're going to create solutions that we never expected.
One of the things that we've done is a skills store. And that skills store is basically born out of these communities of practice and the best use cases. And rather than having people go back in and say, where was that prompt that someone did, or where is that document library that people are using, creating these micro applications within the enterprise tools that people can call.
Innovation doesn't wait, and neither do we. At Maximus, we solve problems, streamlining operations, delivering solutions at speed and scale that drive measurable results. From strategy to execution, we simplify complexity, building trust through expertise and innovative technology. Every service, every time. Efficient government delivered. We don't follow innovation, we drive it. Maximus.
Welcome back. Almost half of the employees at the General Services Administration use the agency's new GSAI tool every day, according to the agency's deputy administrator. Stephen Ahikian says a list of use case examples is coming soon. Jonathan Alboum's federal chief technology officer at ServiceNow. He's former chief information officer at the Department of Agriculture. Jonathan, welcome. The use at GSA of their AI tool is indicative, I think, of what we're seeing across government. It's more pervasive than ever. What's the biggest issue that you see with the way organizations are using AI and getting a handle around how their employees are using it?
Well, Francis, I think you're right. It's ubiquitous across government at this point. Thousands of use cases were reported back in January when agencies were asked to share their inventories. And as the technology begins to take hold like that, I think one of the big challenges typically is how is the technology governed? How do we know that this technology that we're all starting to use is providing real value to agencies? How do we understand the data that's used to train these models? How are they being used? Is it effective? So without governance tools and ways to manage risk, I think as a federal government community, we have a higher likelihood of not getting the real value from these things and not creating the trust with the public as we serve them using AI. So this is a call from my perspective to think about how we govern and manage this technology.
Where should that governance come from, and what would you like to see included in it, Jonathan?
Well, I don't think the governance should come strictly from the CIO or even the chief AI officer. I think governance topics like this become a agency level issue, a corporate issue, if you will, because we need to tie that governance into other aspects of an agency's operation, data governance, cybersecurity, more general risk management that might be managed from the top of the agency. AI is going to, and already is impacting the way those functions are performed in different organizations. So it needs to be done from up high, in my opinion, and it needs to be done in a way that we can integrate data and we can integrate other aspects of agency operations into a process that has some standard approaches to it, so it becomes repeatable.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like there are a lot of stakeholders that should be involved in setting that governance beyond CIO, CDO, CAIO, and so on. Is that a fair read on that point?
I think absolutely correct. And when you look at the governance models that are out there, the one that perhaps is most prevalent is the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. And if you just look at how the initial versions of that were created, it was done through a collaborative process with stakeholders from government and from industry coming together to make sure that there was a buy-in. Right? It wasn't, and we know that the AIRMF is not mandatory. It's available for agencies to use, and the more buy-in there is, and as you create these things, the more likelihood there is that they'll be used. And I think the same goes for not just the creation of a framework like that, but its use inside an agency. You want to bring together these disparate groups, and ideally we bring them together in a way where people can see the data, they can see the value that these models are creating, so we know where to invest and we know where to take some corrective actions.
What are the outcomes that you would like to see as a result of each agency establishing some type of governance framework, Jonathan?
Well, ideally, if we're bringing this data together, we can look at some key metrics. One, what's the inventory? And we can make that inventory available at least to people in the agency. And we can demonstrate how that inventory of AI capabilities aligns to strategy, aligned to administration priorities, mission outcomes. And then, you build on that with a risk conversation. Where do these models and where do these AI use cases create risk to maybe how the agency operates, to the public in general? And then we can look at how is the execution of these models working? Are they providing real value? Can we make a monetary assessment of the value created in times of maybe hours saved or dollars saved if we're talking about fraud? And then, I think lastly, can we show that we're in alignment with requirements, with laws, with other privacy concerns, data concerns. And now we have the ability to demonstrate not just that we're getting AI into the public, into the hands of government workers, and it's being used to change the way we interact with the public, but we're doing it in a way that is safe and secure and creates trust. If this technology can be used to build trust in the way government operates, which is, I think, one of the most important issues that we have to think about as a federal IT community, we've gone far beyond just replacing workers that might have left government. We're changing the way people think about their interactions with the government. We create great experiences for them, and their perception of the way government serves them is enhanced. And if we can do that as a federal IT community, I think we've made tremendous strides.
I always love having you on the show, Jonathan. Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You can read more about AI governance on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the fraud detection dilemma that's eating agency budgets. Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. Around where data should go.
I think that's absolutely right. We often will get the statement, we don't care if there's a little bit of noise, just give us everything, because they want to make sure that they're not missing anything, and they want to ensure that they're having as much reach as they can and as much visibility as they can for the data sets that are going to get them their insights that they need.
Welcome back. The Government Accountability Office says the Defense Department's behind in updating its strategy to fight fraud. Agency leaders across government claim they've put in place or are going to put in place fraud-fighting strategies. Linda Miller's founder and CEO of the Audient Group. She's former Deputy Executive Director of the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee. Jordan Burris is head of public sector at Secure. He's former Chief of Staff to the Federal Chief Information Officer at the Office of Management and Budget. Friends, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. Linda, I start with you. What's the textbook definition of fraud? I think a lot of people don't understand what exactly that term means.
Yeah, well, at the core, fraud must involve willful deception. So really, that's the basic difference between fraud and waste or abuse. If you can prove in a court of law that somebody has intended to steal something that they're not entitled to, that's fraud.
What's the implication of that then for the way the government goes about fighting fraud, and fraud is often combined with waste and abuse?
Yeah, well, from my perspective, and when I was at GAO, when we were working on the GAO fraud framework, what's most important is fraud risk. So where are the loopholes or the holes, the ways that somebody might get around to steal something? Whether or not you can prove that that person did that willfully or whether they did it inadvertently, the result is the same. And so from our perspective, it's less important to focus on the definition of the word fraud and more important to make sure that you've closed any vulnerabilities you have that somebody could compromise.
Jordan, where are those vulnerabilities and where are the greatest opportunities for somebody to steal something from the government?
Yeah, and first and foremost, thank you, Francis, for having me on the show today. But as far as like where the greatest vulnerabilities exist today, it actually starts right at the front door. So for a long period of time, agencies have neglected their controls, if you will, around identity verification and fraud prevention. So as you're engaging and starting to interact with the government, they're unable to tell today, many cases, if you are who you're claiming to be. The vulnerability here is what is really a treasure trove for nation-state actors who have now taken it upon themselves to attack federal programs at scale and find ways to intercept what would be benefits and or disrupt critical operations all across the country.
So what you're describing is the reason that I read about, at least, behind a lot of the improper payment problems that agencies have. Is what you're talking about the core of the issue at preventing the pay and chase mentality that a lot of agencies take in their approach to that today?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about like the way federal agencies have long been oriented, it's been this premise of, hey, we're going to get benefits out of the door as quickly as possible. Back when I worked in OFCIO, or the Office of the Federal CIO rather, we were there as we were making very, very hard decisions during the course of the pandemic about payments that had to go to people quickly. And so typically the mindset of someone working in the federal government would be to send that payment as quickly as possible to them, and then if it was fraud, potentially claw it back. The challenge is that it's not going to someone in their mom's basement within the US. It's going to China, it's going to Russia, it's going to even to Egypt and India, right? And research has shown that basically once it has left the coffers of the federal government, it's not something that can be clawed back. And so the only way in which you're actually able to stop these people at scale is by preventing them in the first place from being able to intercept benefits and steal someone's identity to use it for a nefarious purpose.
What did you see at the PRAC, Linda, that applies to what other agencies are doing in other instances that would help them trying to figure out how to prevent fraud?
Well, what we saw during the pandemic was, as Jordan was talking about, really significant organized efforts to steal at scale. So we saw some Nigerian rings that were operating enormous fraud schemes against the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. Same with China, APT 41, which is a really nefarious cyber group. So we saw this really taking off during the pandemic, but what's happened, and I think it's not as well known, is that it's only accelerated since the pandemic. I think there's this common myth in the government that during the pandemic we had all that money and everybody, foreign adversarial nation state actors were targeting it, but now we're back to normal. Now we're not having that problem. But what's happened is a whole generation of cyber criminals have now cut their teeth on how to steal money from the government during the pandemic, and they're doing it in vast amounts in various different ways. Right now we're looking at obviously disasters like the wildfires and the flooding in Texas. We've seen these really sort of outrageous and brazen scams against the student loan program, federal student aid, where these foreign adversarial nation state actors are posing as students, getting the student loans, and then never showing up to take any classes. And so we're seeing how well organized and sophisticated these schemes are. And again, the government agencies are simply not prepared for this level of sophistication.
What do they need to do to prepare? You first, Linda, and then I'll ask you too, Jordan.
Well, yeah, first of all, they need to stop assuming that when somebody says who they are, that they are, in fact, that person. So the trust and don't verify process that we have in place today is just simply not working. Agencies are going to have to start to do more identity verification. They're going to have to use tools and technologies, data and advanced tools and technologies to verify someone's identity before making the payment to them. And again, we're still in a place where, I worry right now that there's so much negative press around fraud that it's easier not to look for it because then you're not going to find it because fraud is deceptive. And so my concern is that agencies are going to continue to try to look the other way because looking towards fraud and trying to prevent it, you're going to uncover it, and that could end up making them look bad.
Jordan, what do agencies need to do that they're not doing today?
Right, absolutely. So I think, if anything, to be a little bit more provocative, I would say the first thing starts with admitting there's a problem, right? To Linda's point, right, it is very easy to basically neglect the reality that they're facing today. And when it comes to understanding where fraud is, understanding how it moves across federal agencies, I always say that fraud's like running water. It's going to find the path of least resistance in order to penetrate systems as they exist today. The reality is most of government infrastructure and identity infrastructure for that is outdated. It has never been prioritized, right? It should be prioritized like you would the power grid or like you would running water, because identity is essential for delivering services across the American public. However, that's never been the case. So the reality of what then happens for these agencies is that if they're not moving forward, they're not taking a proactive approach, they're never actually going to get the resources that are in place in order to fight back. They're never going to think about identity, instead of it being a point in time thing, as something that is continuously evolving and having to continuously iterate and combat what is coming from nation states, and effectively stop fighting a battle using what would be the equivalent of a flip phone today, when our adversaries are leveraging artificial intelligence at scale in order to disrupt government operations.
Are there agencies that are doing it well, Jordan? Are there agencies that have a plan in place that other agencies could borrow from?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I would say that across the federal government, there are a number of agencies that are really starting to lean in and understand how to turn the tide of battle. And in some cases, many of these agencies also experienced the pain many years ago, right? So we'll look at agencies such as Small Business Administration, for an example. They've leaned in very heavily in towards understanding what it is to combat fraud at scale, how to measure it, and then more importantly, how to put in place controls that can mitigate the risk associated with an identity theft instance that occurred. Despite anything that's happened previously, I will also give credit to General Services Administration. Right, they are starting to take kind of a renewed focus in how they've approached identity and identity verification as part of their roadmap, which they've put out publicly. They've highlighted new measures that they're starting to put in place, and I think those two examples there start to set the stage as to how we can continue to improve, but please let's not mince words. There's a lot of work that needs to be done all across the federal government.
Linda, we have about a minute left. You mentioned earlier that it's easier to not look for it because then you won't find it. Short of having to look for it and find it, is it possible to make a return on investment argument that we have to find what we have in order to demonstrate how bad the problem is?
Absolutely, and there's great examples of agencies that have put in place preventative controls, and we've been able to measure the results of those preventative activities. In particular, HHS has put in place some programs, and they've been able to measure what it would have cost, what they would have lost, but what the preventative tool or control they put in place was able to save. We're going to have to learn from those kinds of examples and make those examples come alive for other agencies so that they will hear and see that there's real benefits to putting in place preventative anti-fraud tools.
Linda, Jordan, it's great to have both of you here. Thanks for joining me today.
Yep.
You can read more about fighting fraud on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. The technical data management transformation's underway at the Defense Logistics Agency. Ken Watson, the acting commander of DLA's Land and Maritime, will tell you about it on the Fed Gov Today podcast. It's available now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your shows, and you can always find the podcast on demand at fedgovtoday.com. Fed Gov Today continues in a moment. You talked about the reactive to proactive shift that's possible. That's really been the golden ticket that people have been searching for in the cybersecurity realm for, I don't know, maybe since there's been a cybersecurity realm, right?
Right. So the key there is leveraging AI to find the vulnerability before it hits the enterprise, right? So I think the current state of affairs is trying to discover the vulnerability after it enters the enterprise as quickly as possible. Well, what if we could find the vulnerability before it hits? What if we could find where it was being sold in a dark web forum or where it was trending online, and we were able to inform the government agency that, in fact, they have a potential issue. Now, these government agencies, which again are resource bound, can prioritize their activity and put the defenses in place to prevent the attack from happening in the first place.
Welcome back. In today's event spotlight, TechNet Augusta is the premier opportunity for collaboration for Army Cyber Command and industry. It's happening in Augusta, Georgia again this year, August 18th through 21st. Lieutenant General Maria Barrett, the commander of Army Cyber Command, and the Chief Information Officer of the Army, Leonel Garcia, are just two of the speakers on the agenda at TechNet Augusta. You can read more about it and register at fedgovtoday.com/events. FedGov Today TV returns next Sunday morning at 10:30 with Defense Department CISO Katie Arrington. I'm Francis Rose. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching. Have a great week.